Welcome to the Squared Circle Pit with your host, Rob Pasbani.
Now entering the Squared Circle Pit, he is a pro wrestling journeyman for over 20 years in the sport all over the world, and the frontman of the Ohio punk band Forlorn United. I'm very happy to have Matt Cross on the show, M-Dogg 20 even. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining me.
How are you?
As I was doing my research about you for this interview, I was blown away at like how many different promotions and countries all over the world you've gone to. You hear that like, oh, WWE is the only game in town, and you're proof that is not true because you've been working for 20 years now, almost 30 years, and you are getting work all over the world. So I think that's very, very cool. And I love that you are also in a punk band. So let's start at the beginning. Which did you discover first? Is it wrestling or rock music?
Music, for sure. Freshman year of high school, I'm wearing like Rancid t-shirts, straight edge t-shirts. I see another guy in a hallway also wearing the exact same Victory Records straight edge shirt, Rancid t-shirts. So it's an upperclassman, but we kind of meet eyes in the hallway. Long story short, that's Josh Prohibition, who was the guy who eventually would then get me into wrestling. But punk predates wrestling for sure. And then my love of wrestling only grew because it was presented to me as it was through ECW, and that was punk.
Absolutely.
I was like, I don't even like wrestling. Like Josh asked me, do you want to come over, watch this wrestling? And I wanted to go over there so bad just to talk about music. And when he invited me over to watch a wrestling pay-per-view, I told him no, even though I wanted to hang out with him so bad. And then I thought to myself, well, how bad can it be? And it turns out it was ECW, which was life-changing because I was like, hold on a second. Like this guy, New Jack, is jumping up everything, bleeding up everything, swearing. The audience is involved. I was like, because we all, punk is more than a sonic template. It's an attitude, a feeling. It's that crowd is as important as the performers. And all of that was at the forefront of ECW. So I was like, oh, it's just punk. So I instantly gravitated toward it. But yeah, that's what's funny is music was first.
What was the event? What was the ECW pay-per-view? Do you remember?
Oh, crap. I have looked it up since, but I forget right now. I want to say it was like Cyber something.
Cyber Slam. Maybe.
Was that an event? I want to say
I don't think it was a pay-per-view. It was like Hardcore Heaven, Heat Wave were the ones. Did you ever get to see ECW live?
Yeah, many times, which is funny because in my head, like everyone has. And then as the years tack on, I'm like, oh, that's not true. I recently went to go see Amel and the Sniffers in Columbus, Ohio, and they played at a place called Newport. And I saw ECW there probably in 98, 99. And then wrestled there for ICP a couple years later. And in my head, like everyone has that same experience with the building. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, if you're 20 years old, you weren't even born yet. And I was like cheering for RVD in this building. But yeah, Josh and I went to Heatwave 98 in Dayton, Ohio, which is like this monumental day in my life because I specifically remember so many parts of it. This guy, Grosh, who's now the bass player in the band, went with us. So it's Josh Prohibition, myself, Grosh, driving to Dayton, Ohio. We listened to Cox Bar and Operation Ivy the whole way down there. Those are still my favorite bands. I had a 10-yard fight straight edge t-shirt on. I'm still straight edge. Like either I self-actualized at 15 years old and I'm the coolest person ever, or nothing's changed in my life and it's horribly depressing. I don't know which one it is. I mean, those are the facts. I don't know which day to day I go back, whether it's awesome or horrible, but like that was just like a monumental day. And like, I can't believe like how many years have gone by and how little has changed in some ways.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. I kind of feel the same way with how, like exactly what you said, how ECW had such an effect on my life as well, with how more on the music side, it introduced me to all these heavy bands that I never really listened to, and the punk attitude. I think the thing that drew me in about ECW is, much like with punk shows, the barrier was gone. Like the fans and the fans were part of the show much more than WWF and WCW, and like everyone was equal. you know, like the wrestlers were the fans were the wrestlers. Like they were taking weapons from the fans. And that's so cool that you went to Heatwave 98. I've talked about it a lot on this podcast. It is maybe my favorite wrestling event. The RVD and Sabu versus Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki match is just absolutely legendary to me. And it was the first time I ever saw Hayabusa because I'd only seen photos of him and like, you know, like just very, very short clips on AOL of just like one move, but to see a whole match and like, it was so that's so cool that you got to see that live.
I think it's the best pay-per-view of all time. And that's not just limited to wrestling, like movies, whatever, NASCAR, boxing, whatever can be bought and watched. To this day, I stand by that. And I don't know if it's clouded by the fact that I was there, but like the finish to the opener, Jerry Lynn and Just Incredible was like a pile driver up the second rope. Like, oh my God. That's still like how far ahead that's the finish of the opener. So that sets the tone of like, you got Mike Awesome versus Tanaka. Like it was so unbelievable. And it did kind of plant this seed of like the same as Punk. I was like, wait a minute, I can do this, you know, which I thought, which was always the appeal of Punk. You know, the Sex Pistols started, and then every single person apparently that went to their gigs was like, I'm going to start a band. So that's how you get the Clash, etc. And it's like, that's such an empowering, cool thing. And like that happened, you know, in the late 70s through Punk. And then ECW kind of carried that tradition, if you will, like forward. And we all had that seed planted for us.
How did you find Punk? What was your first exposure to it?
My background is gymnastics. I did that for 11 years. That's such a demanding sport. So we had practice 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. So it's just like all encompassing. So I remember thinking when I was a kid, like, oh, there are people that like music. I'm not one of them. Like, I'm just focused on gymnastics. Then I had a buddy later years in high school that was like trying to get me into like industrial music, like KMFDM and stuff. So I'm kind of along for the ride. And I'm like, okay, it's not really speaking to me, but I don't know. We go to this thing called Buzzard Fest 95 to see Moby. We're walking around and like Face to Face is playing and it stops me in my tracks. And I was like, dude, what is this? And I remember he's like, oh, this is Punk. Like, we don't like that. And I was like, I don't know what that means, man. But like, these dudes are doing it, man. Like, whatever this is. And then I think the Mighty Mighty Bosstones also played. So I had never seen skanking. I'd never heard of ska. I'd never been cars on the stage, just dancing, not playing a single instrument. It blew me away. I mean, especially in these like pre-internet days where you're just not aware of everything. So I'm like, everyone in the audience is doing this weird dance. There's tootly toot horns. Like, this is the craziest thing. Like, what is ska? But all these things were just, and then it was either 95 or 96 at one of the Buzzard Fests the Ramones played. So it's like, game over, you know, like I just think certain people, I don't know if I found it found me, whatever it was, but I just left my buddy in the dirt because I was like, dude, I mean, like Netzareb and Front 242 and whatever these bands were, I was like, yeah, I guess. But like the second I saw the Ramones and Face to Face, like whatever's just intrinsically in us, I was like, bro, this is me done. Like, I'm done. And that was 1995. And I never, ever, ever looked back. I was just like, this is the sound. Like, this is going to be in my earphones the day I die. Like, I just knew it. You know, it was such a powerful, the first time I ever heard Sound System by Operation Ivy, I remember just running as fast as I could in circles around my buddy's house, just running, it was just immediate, you know? And I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. So
it still holds up too, I think. I was just listening to that album like a week or two ago.
It's just like Heatwave 98 is the best pay-per-view of all time. The Energy album is untouchable. Like, it's perfect. Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned Netzarep because I just got into them like a year or two ago and I'm like dying to see them live.
Funny.
I think they're playing like in a year or two. So you mentioned gymnastics. I think that's so cool that you did that. And I never had the athleticism to be a pro wrestler, but I thought if I ever were to do, like if I was, 20 years younger, I'm around your age, and I wanted to get into pro wrestling, I would start with gymnastics because I feel like that's such a great foundational aspect. How did you get drawn into that?
I don't know if I had a choice. My parents sort of made me. If I'm candid, I think my mom was just like trying to live vicariously. I think it's always something that she wanted to do and never got the opportunity.
I see.
So, and you got to start her. I mean, I started at 10, and my whole career I was playing catch up because I started so late. I mean, you want to be in at like 6, 7, 8. So 10 was too late to start the sport, but it was basically like, you're going to do this. And the first year or two, I hated it. I remember the switch was, well, if I stick with this, I'll learn how to do a back tuck, a backflip. And then when I score a touchdown in football, I'll be able to do a backflip. So that was the initial appeal. I was like, I'll just be able to do flips all the time. So like, that'll be sick. And then once you get, engrossed in that whole world, you're like, okay, I'm in. It's pretty intense, but it wasn't necessarily my choice at the beginning, really.
So you were always just an athletic kid then, I guess, since you're also doing football and everything like that, like sports, just you were drawn to sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have like some like early, I don't even know if it was a camcorder back then. It may have even been like old school, like reel to reel film or whatever it was of me on like monkey bars at like 0 years old. My mom loves to tell the story of I was in a crib, she swears, at 6 months old. They put me to bed, go downstairs to watch TV, and all of a sudden I come downstairs. So my mom's yelling at my dad, like, why didn't you put him in the crib? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I did. And she's like, you obviously didn't. He's come down the stairs out of his crib. So they went up and then, from the doorway kind of peeked in and watched me, apparently, climb the side of the bars, come off the other side, climb down at 6 months. So I started sleeping in a full bed at like 6 months old. So they're just like, okay, what are we going to do with this animal? Like, he's just going crazy. So that was a much more productive use of those sort of innate talents or whatever.
So was it because you were into gymnastics that you were kind of turned off to wrestling because it was like a, fake sport or whatever? Like you didn't consider, or what was it that wasn't initially appealing about wrestling to you?
Well, it's funny because I watched it as a kid. So like Hulk Hogan, Dusty Rhodes, and we named our family dog Dusty Rhodes, even because he was my favorite wrestler. My mom, come to find out, thought I was saying Dusty Rose. And she's like, what a poetic little kid. Like, how did he come up with this? She didn't know it was like this like crazy dude or whatever. So I liked it.
Were you watching with your parents or like?
No. Because one day my dad literally said like, why are you watching this garbage? It's fake. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, the Macho Man is the machoest man in the planet. Like, there's no debating that. And then literally the next day I'm watching and I'm like, oh my God, is he? And I stopped watching that day. Like, it was an overnight thing for me because I just felt like the wool had been pulled over my eyes and I felt cheated. And I was like, up to high school, up to ECW. And then when I'm seeing Tajiri versus Super Crazy, I'm like, oh, this is gymnastics presented in like a cooler way. Like, if you could update gymnastics and have music or something, or have a crowd that's more enthusiastic, and I'm watching it through this lens of my dismount off high bar. It was a full twisting double backflip. So the chances of death are like 99.9%. Like, you're going to die. It's insane. And then what? Your mom's in the crowd? Like, and then I'm watching Super Crazy do a single backflip that I learned at 10 years old. And there's people like partying and throwing chairs. And I was like, hold on a second. I was like, this looks awesome. And gymnastics did influence in the way that gymnastics is so rigid. There's literally a code of points, which is a paper book, and everything is to the book. You can be deducted points for your hairstyle. Like, it's insane the amount of so you have to do you're chasing this impossible perfection. So when I saw wrestling, you don't have to do everything perfectly. You could do a backflip, tweak it out to the side, and now it's yours. Now it's your style. Now it's you could add stylistic elements that you can't. Gymnastics is so rigid, and I was just like, So then once I saw wrestling, I was like, oh, I can do whatever I want. It was very freeing.
It was like an open canvas. Like you said, it was like the punk rock thing. It's just do it on your own, however you want it. So you're watching ECW. Who are your guys? Who stands out to you?
Yeah, there's 6 guys. It's 3 feuds. It's Masato Tanaka versus Mike Awesome. It's Super Crazy versus Tajiri, and it's RVD versus Jerry Lynn. Those will forever define hardcore wrestling to me. I haven't wrestled Mike Awesome. I haven't wrestled Tanaka yet, but the other 4 I have. So once I wrestle Tanaka, I think I just retire, because then I'll have wrestled every single person that directly got me into wrestling. Like, that without those 6 humans, I'm not in this at all. I don't see the world. I don't do any of it. I'm an architect, and who knows? Maybe I'm significantly happier. But like, I'm not in wrestling.
I was gonna say, like, as you mentioned it earlier, I was like, oh, I could really see a lot of like RVD and Jerry Lynn in your style. I'm sure for you as well. Also, just seeing these guys that aren't these like boulders of men, and they're doing like super athletic stuff. I'm sure that was very, very inspiring for you.
Yeah. It wasn't these monster bodybuilders, whatever. It just seemed,
Yeah.
again, it's that punk ethos where it's like anybody could do it. It didn't like Spike Dudley or whatever. You're like, oh, like I could definitely beat this dude up. Like he can do it. So like, what's it was open to everybody, which was again the appeal to punk.
Yeah, and that to me, that era to me was very interesting as well, because I think that's when for me I was developing my taste of like what I actually like, and much like you, I gravitated a lot to the more athletic stuff like the luchadors in WCW, and I started realizing like, I don't care about Hulk Hogan. I don't care about the main event program. I care about this action. I want to be wowed. I want to see the flips. I love the flippy shit.
I always thought it was like pseudo embarrassing when people were like, "It's a soap opera for men," and I personally wasn't drawn to the soap opera elements. I like Guy X was insulted by Guy Y's sister, and now they have to like. I want to see an athletic exhibition between Tajiri and Super Crazy. I don't. It's 2023. Why did they fight? I don't know. I have no idea if there even ever was a backstory of like Super Crazy stole Tajiri's lunch or whatever it was. I don't care. And if you do, amazing. But for me personally, I was like, oh man, like you had to win me over with what you were doing. And that was gymnastics. There was no like, I don't care about the guy's backstory. Like, show me the routine. Like, let's see it. Like, what do you bring to the table? You got to win me over here. So, yeah.
When did you decide you wanted to pursue wrestling?
Probably Heatwave 98.
You're like, I got to do this. Did you find a school in your area, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, we started doing backyard wrestling. Josh had three younger brothers, so they were beating each other up in the backyard. And then we got some notoriety off that. There's the backyard wrestling tapes back in the day, backyard wrestling video game. Just right place, right time, got involved in all that. And then JT Lightning, who has since passed, was running a school called Cleveland All Pro Wrestling, and approached us and was like, you guys are already doing shooting star presses and dives to the outside, crashing through tables. He's like, you're doing quote unquote the hard stuff, but you don't know how to lock up. You can't like grab an arm wringer. Like you don't know top wrist locks, any of like the basics, which are, not rocket science. So they're like, he's like, and maybe it was just a ploy to get people to his school. I don't know. But he's like, you should really consider going to formal school, because he's like, I think you could do something like genuinely. And this guy was like the godfather of Cleveland wrestling, keeping in mind that, Johnny Gargano trained under him, Eric from the Viking Raiders, myself, Josh Prohibition. So like basically anyone involved in Cleveland professional wrestling that came through him, the entire scene would be different, if not non-existent, without this one guy. So it's kind of cool.
That's great. And so when like you're doing the backyard stuff, which I think is so cool, and I feel like such a moment in time. Like I don't know if kids today would do that. Like it just seems so dangerous, like reflectively. But I mean, I did backyard wrestling with no just messing around, and then you're gaining like notoriety to the point that an actual wrestler comes in and does this. Like, at what point were you like, oh, I'm doing this? Like this is happening for me. Like, when did that click for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I remember being in Josh's backyard and just like vocalizing, saying out loud to one another, like, we could wrestle in Japan, we could wrestle in Mexico, maybe, like we could do all these things without a clue of how to do it or if that's possible or whatever. You just don't even know. So you're throwing all these things out. And so even now to reflect on that and be like, oh, we did it. Like we really did it. So I don't know if ever we started in backyard wrestling, a wave started. In some ways, I've been riding that wave ever since. Like I started getting emails, and then I'm still getting emails. Like it was never really by design. It was never going to be a job. It was never going to be a career. If you would have told me I would be doing it 25 years later, I'd have been like, there's absolutely no way. I think at the time we were like, well, we'll do it until we're 26, because any time past that is insane. Then all of a sudden you're 26 and you're like, well, I'll do it till 30. Anything past that is insane. And then I was like, well, I'll do it till 35. And then I was 35 and I'm like, I'll do it till 40. Anything after that is insane. So now I've given up on like putting numbers on it, because I'm like, I'm going to do it until the wheels fall off, obviously. And Yeah. So I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm in so many ways still that 18-year-old that like was like, oh, okay, I got an email. Like, yeah, I can do that. Sounds awesome. Like, and then fast forward years, I don't, I just sort of unfolded.
What was your like side gig while you were training and doing like the early wrestling stuff? Did you have like another path that you were like a backup plan or anything like that?
I was still in gymnastics at
Oh,
the
okay.
very beginning of like for a year or two, they overlapped where I was kind of doing both. Um, and then I went to Ohio State, and a couple years later graduated from Cleveland State. So initially, I wanted to be like an architect, and then my degree is in communication. I missed my graduation to wrestle in Hawaii. They mailed me my diploma. I put it on top of the fridge in 2006, and it's still there as far as I know. Probably covered in 3 inches of dust, and never looked at it.
Yeah, it's like who needs a graduation when you get to wrestle in Hawaii? I'm with you. I would have taken the Hawaii trip.
Yeah, it's like walk across the stage, or here we go, Oahu it is.
And let's talk about your band a little. I really like it. Forlorn United. You guys sound like an 80s UK punk band. Yeah, I feel like you even kind of sing with a British accent. How did that come about?
I mean, it's kind of going full circle in the interview here. The first time Josh and I ever got in a ring for JT, my band opened up the wrestling show. So before we wrestled in the main event of our first time ever even being in a ring, because it's like indoor backyard wrestling, really. My band played before that, so it's a like a crazy. So this is like 1998 or 1999, so genuinely 25 years ago. So in some ways the music is like brand new, and then in some ways it's like I've been doing it for 25 years. um, Even some of the people involved were there 25 years ago. So it's my friends from like middle school, and I probably averaged one punk show a week since 98. So all we do is go to shows. We love that space. We love that world. And then so it's always in the back of my mind, but I was just, I act as my own agent. I'm traveling the world. I'm wrestling every weekend. It's just, there wasn't time. And then during the pandemic, like that excuse kind of flew out the window because I was always in the back of my mind repeating, you're too busy, you're too busy. And then I was like, I'm doing nothing. So I'm like, oh, let's dust off the base here. And stupidly, I didn't think you could write songs on the bass. I thought I have to have a guitar player over. I'll just let them noodle around and win something. Like I know the sound. When I hear something I like, I'll be like, oh, that, or rewind and let's little bits and pieces. So I thought I'd be sort of like this conductor on in that way. What I've come to realize is like, man, was I wrong? I wish somebody 25 years ago would just started beating the crap out of me and be like, you're an idiot, dude. You can absolutely write. So now I write all the songs on bass, and then it's like the guitar player has to be like, what note are you playing to even know what he's doing? And I'm like, it just flipped everything. I was like, I thought you're just hitting like one note. It's a stupid bass. You can't do anything. And I'm like, I'm an idiot. Like you can 100% write songs on a bass. You can write a song on any instrument. I wish somebody would have told me that. So hopefully somebody listening, like, I don't care what, if you play the flute, you can write a song on it 100%, pick up the damn flute and start going. Cause like, don't let it stop you. I was waiting on other people to like fulfill this dream of mine. And now I'm like, oh, no more waiting. So yeah, we started during the pandemic, and it's been awesome. And I actually like that you said 80s punk because that probably is, like the early all the UK 82 and then the early Oi scene is like definitely informed. That's what we've been listening to. I mean, like I said, the Heatwave 98, we listened to Cox Bar the whole way down there. So it's funny how when you write songs, like there's the influences are like unintentional. I'm like learning because like every show we do, people come and say something similar, which I love. Like if we were sounded like we're on No Future Records in the 80s, the first 10 releases, then I'll die happy. Like that's the greatest thing. And it's not something that I set out to do. I was just like, what are my fingers doing? What am I channeling? What song did I write? But then there is like this osmosis. Like if you've spent 20 years, 25 years listening to a certain sound, it is going to bleed into what you do, which I love because all the influences are there. So it's like, obviously I'm heavily biased, but I'm like, hey, these songs are pretty good. But I think it's because they're in the vein of everything I've been listening to forever.
That's so funny. Like, so you didn't even have like a goal of like, I want this to sound like 80s, or it's just like what it came out as basically.
It's even funnier. So I came up with I wanted to start a power violence band. I had a name, an aesthetic, lyrics, everything. I was like, let's go. But again, I didn't think you could write songs on bass. So I invite my buddy over, the guitar player, and I'm like, bam, hit it, you know? And then he's like, okay, what do you want to sound like? So I'm playing him like Infest and stuff. And then he's like, dude, I can't do this, which was mind blowing because to the outside world, this sounds like someone just smashing a guitar and just noise. It sounds like garbage. It sounds like a baby could do it by stepping on a guitar. And it opened my eyes. He's like, no, dude, like the speed at which they're playing, like it, there's certainly a level of talent at play here. He's like, I can't play that fast. He's like, he's like, I have to practice so much. I can't do it. And that blew my mind because I thought it's just, so I was like, so the whole plan, my whole plan went out the window. I was like, oh no. So then we had to completely scrap that and start from square one, which was me picking up the bass being like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I was like, well, I mean, this is what I'm doing. My buddy's like, hey, that's actually pretty sick. Like, so we wrote our first song or two. And then only once I listened to him back, I was like, dude, it's Oi. Like we're writing Oi. I was like, wait, what? This isn't the plan, like whatsoever. I thought it was gonna be like this super hard project. And then even when my buddy would say the word melody, I don't like that word for some reason. Like I understand it and I know you need it. I mean, you don't need it, but to me it was like the enemy or something. Yeah, my buddy's like, oh, that's a sick melody. And I was like, no. Like when I hear that word, it makes me sound like I'm messing up. Because then it sounds like, to me, it's like synonymous with like pop. And I'm like, no, I don't, like, get the melody out of there. And then I'm like, oh, I guess like Cox bar is melodic and stuff. It's just, I wasn't thinking in those terms. But yeah, we'll have these like big sing-alongs or all these different parts. And I'm like, wow, who knew? Like, and my buddy would play something. I'm like, can you play that higher? And then it would have this like triumphant sound. And I'm telling him, he's like, no one plays that high. And like, and I was like, just try it up there. And then he did. And I'm like, dude, these are like, this is so sick. Like we're writing Oi songs. So yeah, it just sort of happened, which is great because I like that we almost didn't steer it. And then even when I sit down to write something, it's just I don't have anything in mind. It's just true to what comes out of me. And then I'm less worried about like, does this fit with some sound? Because I don't know. It's like all bands are all good bands. Like how varied is Rancid, for example? But you still know it's Rancid. Like,
Yeah.
Is it like this reggae-esque track? Is it a like banger punk song? Is it more ska influenced? Is it Oi influenced? Like they kind of encompass all these subcultures and all these genres, but like at the same time, there's still something like core Rancid about it that's like almost instantly recognizable. So then I'll write something and I'm like, that's way too weird. That's way too out there. And I'm like, no, because if I sing with my crappy voice over it, it's going to all bring it together. And that's kind of like empowering and fun because you realize like you're not limited at all. Like I can write something that just like at first glance, you're like, that's not our sound. But then once you add in all the layers, you're like, oh, it is.
And also, I think because you have all this experience with wrestling, like for me, it's very hard to go up on stage and sing. I just feel too self-conscious.
Yeah.
Also, I'm a terrible singer, but that's beside the point. But I think, you have all the experience with wrestling where I don't even think that enters your mind, right? Like you weren't even, is there any bit of self-consciousness when you're up on stage or even in the ring?
I mean, I can't wait to do it. Like I wish I had a show tonight, like, and more so than wrestling, because wrestling hurts, man. Like wrestling is like terrifying and
Right.
like, you're dying and then like your friends have died and you could die and you're going to die. Whereas music, there's absolutely zero chance I'm going to die. And if you had like the lightest match, weakest match of all time, if you did that on stage, it'd be one of the craziest things that's ever happened on stage. So I just feel this freeness of like, let's party. And like every time we've played, people were like, wow, you're really into it and just energetic and everything. And I'm like, yeah, no one's hitting me. No one's like, I don't have to fall on my head. Like it's easy and you can just express yourself. It's like there's a sound to it. So it's innate, which I love. So and it's funny because I write the songs and some of the other guys in the band are much better and more accomplished musicians. But even when I write the songs, I'm like, we do this, the people do this. My one buddy, the drummer, who's the best musician in the band, he's actually a guitarist, but we got him like back there on the drums. He's just like, what are you talking about? He's like, what do you mean when we do this, they do that? I'm like, yeah, the audience, man, we do this, then they'll do that. And he's like, he's like fascinated by it. Cause he's like, oh, you're bringing the wrestling world into, he's like, that's not how music works, or is it? And he's even like, his mind is getting open to this whole, he's like, in every band I've been in the past, we're not thinking about like what the audience is going to do or the interplay there. And it's all I think about. I'm like, we do this, they do that. And then at this part, they're going to do that. Like, I just write the songs I want to hear. I'm like, what would be the coolest thing someone could scream on a stage right now? They'll get me so pumped I would start punching people. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. You know, like, so it's just, there is like this wrestling component that I'm bringing to it that the other guys in the band are kind of pointing out is in some ways unique. And they're like, oh, I've never approached songwriting or music with that in mind. And I'm like, yeah, dude. And I'll use like wrestling terminology and I'll use all this stuff. And there is like definitely parallels.
I love that. That's what I love talking about that on the show as well. It's just like you're writing in moments for a pop. You're writing in a pop into the song, essentially, or like a high spot.
It's the same as how you'd come up with a match. Like it's very similar, yeah.
Changing gears back to wrestling for a second, I wanted to talk a little bit about Wrestling Society X. I was such a big fan of it when it came out, just because it was at a time when on television, all we really had was WWE. This was WCW was gone. I was a big Ring of Honor fan, but it was like living in New York. I was very fortunate to be able to go see it live, but it was very hard to keep up with otherwise because you had to buy the DVDs. It's like a 5-month backlog. But Wrestling Society X was all of the stuff I was seeing on the indies on TV. Very polished with a rock edge. And then like it seemed like it fell apart after one season. But like, what was the experience like for you where like producers are like, hey, we have the show on MTV and we want to feature you on it. How did that feel?
Yeah, it was insane. I got a call out of the blue. I was driving home from Cleveland State. They said, can you go to the airport? And I was like, oh, when? And they're like, now. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, we're filming the show for MTV. It's a wrestling show. It's 10 episodes. You're going to be in the main event of the final episode in an exploding cage. Get to the airport. So I thought they were joking about that stuff. And I'm like, okay, I can make it. Went home, packed my bag, left. Got to LA, literally had my like syllabuses and all that from college. Called my teachers, left messages. I was like, hey, this is so-and-so. I just got this opportunity to do a show on MTV. I didn't feel like I could pass it by. Please don't fail me. School is really important to me. I didn't ask when we're done. I don't even know how long I'm going to be there. When I checked into the airport, I remember asking, is there a return flight on this reservation? And they're like, no, it's a one-way flight. And I was like, okay. And I don't know how long it takes to do a season of television. I'm like, am I going to be there for 2 days or a month? Or a year? I have no idea what I'm signing up for. We started filming the next day. Because basically, Neville Pac was supposed to be in my spot, but had some sort of visa problems. So because of his visa problems, I got that call as last minute as possible. So no one knew less than me. I came in the night before and was like, we're doing what now? And then the irony is they're like, we were going to have him play a Punk character. Can you do that? And I was like, ha! And they gave me this outfit and like I could pick. They had like all these patches. And I'm sure to them, someone went to a store and just grabbed this array of patches. And I'm like, oh, GBH? Yup. Lower class brats? Yup. And I'm like picking out what I want. I don't even know if they knew that they're bands. So I laughed because I think we filmed it in 2006. And I had like a lower class brats bum flap on and stuff. And I was like, I was psyched. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a punk on MTV. Like this rules. Like, here we go. And I think people don't understand now, like, MTV did not in any way, shape, or form have their pulse on what was happening, have their finger on the pulse of what's happening. They were the tastemakers, in my opinion. So when they put something on television, it made it cool, not the other way around. Something wasn't happening in the world that they're like, oh, we should cover this because it's cool.
I agree.
They would put something on there and everyone would accept that as cool. So at the time, it's hard for a current fan to understand, but wrestling was not cool. Period. Not cool. I'm thinking
it was embarrassing. I couldn't even tell people. I was like, I was just hanging out with friends. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm like, MTV is going to put wrestling on MTV. This is for the industry huge because now it's going to remove the stigma. It's going to remove the embarrassment. It's going to be okay to watch wrestling. I'm like, wrestling is going to be cool. Like the entire industry is in debt to us. This is amazing. So the excitement was so high because I thought like kind of like what we're experiencing now. I thought that was going to happen in '06 just off the back of that show. I'm like, wrestling's going to be cool. Period. This is and you know, coming from getting into all of this because I was a fan of ECW. I was like, we're ECW, man. This little small
Yeah.
upstart can't do like throw the rules out the window. It's also insane looking back at like the people involved and how they're still involved. Especially this is 2006, so we're coming up on 20 years ago. Like, how is Seth Rollins still wrestling? How am I still wrestling? How is Matt Sydal still wrestling? How is like insert whoever? So many of the people are still wrestling, which is insane.
That's the thing. I feel like the roster was so ahead of its time just because that was a weird moment in WWE where they weren't recruiting from the indies. They were just getting like just musclehead football guys or what, like just the weird old mentality. And I felt like in WWE was unwatchable in that moment. Just there was no one who could work. It was just these big muscle guys. And so I as a wrestling fan, I had such a hunger for good wrestling. And it was so exciting to see Wrestling Society X because it was the combination of both great young talent and all of these wild matches. Like they had like FMW matches on MTV, but then I feel like even by the season finale, something happened. Like it fell apart. Like I think MTV was burying the show. Like they gave up on it halfway through the season or something.
I think only 3 episodes aired actually.
Oh, okay.
So 3 episodes aired, then it was 100% canceled. Then at some point after that, one day they did a marathon where they showed all the episodes in one day.
That was it. Okay. Yeah.
There was like a DVD release after the fact. But as far as like the first run, 3 episodes aired and then it was
That's
gone.
crazy. There was only 3. Like, I don't even consider that. That's a good point. I think this was actually also the year that I just got my DVR. So I DVR, I had them all on my DVR forever. I would try to show them to people. Yeah. So that's a bummer. It didn't work out. And then a few years later, Lucha Underground comes around. And was it some of the same people? Because it felt like it had a similar vibe to Wrestling Society X, behind the scenes. Was it similar folks or there
there was some crossover with Tough Enough actually. Crazy enough.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Wrestling Society X, there's a lot of parallels that people draw, and I get it because aesthetically it's like this bunker underground feel.
Mm-hmm.
But if you and I were put in a room and we had to come up with a wrestling alternative that couldn't be a giant 1 billion person stadium, what would we most likely come up with? How about like an underground bunker? Like it's the only other alternative.
Right,
So
right.
it's not unbelievable that like any group of people would land on that idea. And it's hard to like compare them because Wrestling Society X, we did the entire season in 6 or 7 days. And Lucha Underground was like 4 years of back and forth to LA. Like,
I see.
so it's so hard to like, there are visual cues that are similar, but it's like Lucha Underground was so legit and such a like big time Hollywood television movie production. And then Wrestling Society X was like, and maybe even more so for me coming in the second before. I'm sure most people had months of preparation and this and that. For me, it's like the next day we're there, we're filming. 6 days later, we're going home. What just happened? Like doing 2 episodes a day, and then it was done forever. So it's like for a week
I see.
in my life, 20 years ago, I did a thing as opposed to like years. So it's, I do get the parallels as far as like getting hot, young, unsigned talent out there.
Yeah.
There are parallels for sure, but
I think with Lucha Underground in particular, I think it was the most original wrestling program released in forever. Like they were the way they did the in interstitials as cinematic using a different film stock. So you, as a viewer, it's suggested to you like, oh, this is what they don't see in the bunker. This only you're seeing this. I really enjoyed that aspect of how they chose to tell the stories much differently. And it was so long since having a mainstream alternative. I almost forgot that there's other ways to present wrestling on television, but WWE. So it was so refreshing to see in that sense.
That's what's insane. At the end of the day, wrestling is an art form. It's art.
Yeah.
So we we're all born into this world where one family controls art. Whatever they like is what they like, is what we then see. What they don't like, we don't see. It's like if you could only paint realist in a realism Renaissance style. And that was it. And that was considered
Right.
art. And anything outside of that was not art. And here comes the first guy ever to do expressionism. And it's like, oh, wait, that makes me feel a certain way. Like, I didn't know that was an option. Like, it's crazy because like somebody has like a stranglehold on art. So yeah, it's nice to ECW is what got me into wrestling as we've gone over.
Yeah.
As the years tack on, I knew it at the time, but now removed, I feel even stronger about it. Like we were the new ECW. Like there's the way I was a kid, I was like, this is New Jack's jumping off everything. This is crazy. I'm like, that was us. It was guys that had been told no other places. So we had this chip on our shoulder. We finally get the distribution. We're like, we all had something to prove. We're like these renegade rebels that then did it. I'm like, holy crap. And as the years go on, that will come more into focus. 20 years from now, and only 20 years from now, will we be like, oh, that is where absolutely everything changed. Like some people have an inkling of that, but it's not even fully realized. Like that's going to be
I
where
think
it's
that's a
like,
good point.
like I'm sure of it. Like the more we get removed from it, the more it'll be like, oh, like the significance of it, because it can never happen again. Well, I shouldn't say it can never happen again, but it would be at least from this second that we're talking 20 years from now that it could happen. You had guys like Ricochet who had WWE tryouts and been told no. Okay. So then he goes on this show being like, no. Same thing with myself. Same thing with insert any of these other guys.
Yeah.
You can't have that nowadays because if you're decent and 2 years in, you're in this, that, or the other company. You could never have a guy that's great, that's 10, 15, 20 years in and frustrated and that was ECW, like bringing that energy that you can't get until you have decades behind you. And we all brought that into this product. That's what you saw. That was the intangible behind the scenes.
I agree with you completely. And I feel like you said, it was such a special time in pro wrestling, like just the indie scene as a whole, because there was this huge surplus of very, very talented individuals who absolutely deserved national stage recognition, and there was no national stage for them. So you had these very hungry guys, and you had all these great, like it was such a fun moment to be a wrestling fan for me. Like I remember spending like $25 on an Evolve ticket and seeing like every world-class wrestler not in WWE. You know, like now I don't think that would be possible because all those guys are signed up, you know, to the big, you got to go see them in an arena and pay $75 or whatever it is. So it's totally different. You mentioned Tough Enough. I quickly want to just touch upon that because I remember that. And I remember when you got announced for it, I was like, oh, I know who this is. You know, like, fine, like, oh, maybe, like, and I was rooting for you to get much further. And I remember you were eliminated maybe like in the second or third, like very early on, you were eliminated. Second episode. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, this is the most talented guy they have there. And I'm sure the reason you were eliminated is because it's a very controlled, as much as they're saying it's a reality show, it's not. It's very, like they wanted you out immediately to show that like anybody's, you know, to tell the story that like, oh, just because you have the experience doesn't mean you have what we're looking for or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I'm saving all the juicy bits. I plan on writing a book someday when this is all said and done. So the chapter on that will be huge because I could talk for the next easily 8 hours without taking a breath about the realities of it. But it is funny how every week I get asked if it was real, and it's a reality show about pro wrestling. Like that's the craziest question in the world to be like, a reality show about wrestling. Like unless the logic is it's so fake that somehow it 360s around into realism or something. Like I'm like, I can't even, I've been trying to think of some analogy for years about like, you know, is that mockumentary about the Easter Bunny real? And you're like, I don't even know where to start with that question. Like, do I start with the concept of a mockumentary? Do I start with the Easter Bunny? I like, you're like, it's like adults some of which are college educated, asking me this, and I was like, I don't even know where to. It's insane, just like the medium of television and what you can. I went home and almost lost my mind. I remember at the time because I was like, this is just an entertainment based thing. What if this was politics? What if this was the news? What if this was in any way, shape, or form important? What if this was and I mean, I don't want to get into that stuff, but like here we are X number of years, and I'm like, that even happened. I every interview I did in 2011 was about this, and I'm like, oh my God, I foresaw everything that's happening now, and just the idea of like propaganda and everything. It's like, holy crap. But to live it and to be on that side of it was insane. So I try to look at like, we were there for a week or two in this like mansion. I just try to think like, I remember the good parts. I remember like the first day I was eating and I'm done and I go to the sink and there's no sponge, there's no dish soap, there's no anything. I was like, wait, how do I wash the dish? And I'm looking like there's a camera guy in your face and I'm like, you're not allowed to talk to him, but I'm like, bro, how do I wash the dish? And he's like, oh, just leave it there. Like they do it. I'm like, oh, we don't wash the dishes? So like we didn't do the laundry. We didn't wash the dishes. You literally wrote down what you wanted to eat. They got it for you. There was no cell phones. There was no TVs. There was no clocks. We didn't even know what time it was. So it's hilarious to be like, it's reality. I can't think of like a worse word to use than like reality. Because I'm like, what reality is this? Where we're not doing our dishes. We don't know what time it is. I don't know where I am. It's like, this is not my reality or anyone that I've ever crossed paths with. So it's so, but then it's almost this trauma bonding with the people that were there. And you're like, because you're just in this insane, even when I was eliminated, it was like, you've been here for 2 weeks, blah, blah, blah. I think we had 2 practices and it had been a couple days. So you're being, the word wasn't even a word at that time. Now I know that like it was gaslighting, but like you're sitting there and they're like, you haven't proven yourself in 2 weeks. It's been 4 days. So you're like, you're looking around, camera, light, microphone. And you're looking for someone to be like, whoa. It hasn't though. Like, can we all face this? Like we've had 2 practices. We learned tie-ups and we learned to run the ropes. What are you talking about? And even their own storyline didn't make sense if you read between the lines, because it was he's boring, he's horrible, he hasn't done anything. And then they simultaneously get sound bites from all the other competitors going, he was the best one here. We can't believe it. If he went home, then we're all at risk because he's the best one. So which one is it? Am I doing the most things and am I the best? Or am I the boring one who hasn't done anything yet? How do they know I'm the best? These people didn't know who I was. So if it's so shocking that I'm gone, which one of you even, like, I love how there was just these glaring plot holes as well, but whatever. Stone Cold Steve Austin called me after the show. I'm in touch with him to this day. Wouldn't have been obviously if it wasn't for this show. So I'm grateful for that.
I mean, that's a victory in and of itself.
Oh, for sure.
That's awesome, man. Well, yeah, I mean, that's basically all the topics I wanted to touch on. Thank you. You've been very generous with your time. I know we went a little over, but congratulations on the band Forlorn United. If you're ever playing around New York City, I'll definitely come out and see you guys. Do you have any other plugs that you want to mention before we get out of here?
Just check out wrestlingsforever.com if you haven't. It's my site that I run in my free time. I'm wrestling every weekend, and then during the week I do that as a way to stay connected to the scene. I mean, as we're talking about this whole time, I think wrestling's such a unique thing. It's almost especially for on this side of it, it's not a job, it's not a career, it's like a lifestyle. So I'm trying to capture the spirit of that, and it's so unique. I mean, there's nothing else where you're gonna, maybe Punk, but like who else is gonna drive 6 hours, get punched in the face, and spit on and drive 6 hours home? And it's just like this weird passion driven, ill-advised thing. So I want to capture the spirit of that with Wrestling is Forever. And I like that it's not, I didn't start wrestling's awesome, wrestling is super cool, because it can be, but it's not necessarily. Every time I get punched in the face, and the cumulative damage of that is likely forever. I hope some of these friendships are forever. The memories, both good and bad, are forever. So I love that it's like this all-encompassing thing. So I run that, so check that out. And then check out the band. We got some buddies in the Jukebox Romantics in that area in New York City, so we're trying to work out something with them to get out that way. But what's so exciting for me is that when I started wrestling with Josh in the backyard, I had no idea what I was doing. our goal was to make it to WWE. I'm no closer to that goal now than I was in 1998. But we had this thing of like, we can wrestle in Japan, we can wrestle in Mexico. We didn't know how outlandish those things were, if they were possible, but we did all of them. And that's what I feel in the band now. It's almost like this ignorance is bliss. I don't know what's possible and I don't know what I'm doing. So it's reverted me back in a positive way to my first year or two in wrestling, where I'm like, do we get signed to a label? I don't know. Do we play in Europe? I don't know. I don't know what's possible and what's not. So there's like zero limiting factors. If I was really engrossed in it and jaded by it, I'd be like, this is what's possible and this is what's not. But for me, I'm like, it's like the first year or two of wrestling when it's pure, and it's just what it's supposed to be. And it's like art for art's sake. And before it becomes a job and a business and bogged down by this or that, like I'm too stupid to know the bad parts yet. So I'm like, you write 6 songs with your buddy and then you punch and kick in front of the audience. Rad. Let's go. So
Yeah.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share that excitement, because it has become this creative outlet for me. That does predate wrestling. When wrestling's all said and done, I'll be doing this till the day I die. So it's nice to have this space.
Yeah, and that's that just triggered a memory I had what you were saying about like making it to WWE. I had a very similar thought process. Like I started this metal website, Metal Injection, and when I started it also 20 years ago, I was like, oh, we need to make it. We need to get bought by MTV or some corporation has to buy us. Like we need to make. And then after a while, I realized like, oh wait, no, making it is not needing the corporation. Making it is being able to have this as a full-time job because I did it on my own. So I think you kind of achieved that same success where you initially were hunting something that you eventually realized you don't even need, right?
Yeah. Just this past weekend, I wrestled somewhere, and there's an older gentleman, and he's like, "Oh man, I hope you make it. I hope you make it." And I was just kind of laughing to myself, because I know as a kid that would have meant something different than what it means now. I would have been like, "He's right. I'm good. I got what it takes. Let's go." And now I was just chuckling to myself because I was like, "Wait, no, I'm doing it right." Like this is the goal. Like,
yeah, this is it.
I woke up at noon. I don't have a job. I'm doing it. Like, and it's like, where do you want to go? Like, no, I want this to just happen for as long as it can. Like, and so it is funny when it's like I'm like the embodiment of like it's the journey, not the destination.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I will link Wrestling Forever into the description, and thank you, Matt, for your time, and thank you for entering the pit.